I read this masterpiece only in a few days. It was amazing. Greetings, this is another reader. Welcome back to my channel. On my channel I have a video named Popular Books I Haven't Read Part 2. The difference between Part 1 and Part 2 is that the books from Part 2 I planned to read eventually. There are only 6 books in that video. I own 5 and I read 2. And I'm going to talk about one of my recent reads. It was so amazing I decided it was worth making a second episode in the series named Why It's Worth Reading. In the second episode of the series you have The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. Now, before I get started, a few words about the author. Michael Ende was born in Bavaria, Germany, and he was the only child of a surrealist painter. As a teenager, he got drafted to fight in the war, but he tore up his call-up letter and he joined the resistance. He wrote his very first novel in the late 50s. His writing style is close to surreal mixture of reality and fantasy. And this is especially true for The Neverending Story. The Neverending Story is Michael Ende's most famous novel, and it was adapted into a film in the 80s. I recently watched the film and I liked it, although I thought that some parts of it were boring. You know, I now regret making my all-time favorite books honest remake video before reading The Neverending Story. After the first read, this masterpiece became one of my favorite novels. I will reread this, and not just once. The plot of the novel revolves around a boy named Bastian Balthazar Books. The story begins when Bastian he hides in a bookstore from the bullies that were chasing him. In the bookstore he finds a book named The Neverending Story and he steals it. He goes to the school attic and he begins reading it, and very soon the reality and fantasy they become intertwined. Bastian becomes an active part of the story. Now here's why The Neverending Story is worth reading. The first reason is the scale of adventure. Above all, The Neverending Story is about epic adventure. The novel shows us a few different protagonists. However, in the first half of the novel, the main focus, apart from Bastian, is Atreyu. The first half is him trying to find a cure for a childlike empress, the ruler of Fantastica, the land they live in. Because there is this thing called the Nothing and it takes over. The childlike empress is the essence of Fantastica. The connection between her illness and the Nothing becomes very clear. It's a traditional hero's journey, and also it has a lot of magical creatures. The second half of the novel focuses mostly on Bastian. Bastian has an important role in the story, but things don't go as you might expect. Second reason is character development. After all, the protagonist of the story is Bastian. In the real world, nothing seems to go right for him. He's bullied, his mother died, his father doesn't pay much attention to him. But then he discovers The Neverending Story. Well, you might expect that he would be a hero in Fantastica. Spoiler alert, it's kinda complicated. No, don't get me wrong, this assumption that he would become a hero is partly true, but then there is also darkness in Bastian that starts to prevail. In some ways, his darkness reminds me of Anakin Skywalker. Yes, Bastian sometimes did remind me of Anakin Skywalker from the prequels. There is also a symbol of power of childlike empress named Orin. The way it affects Bastian, it reminded me of The One Ring. Yes, it's a story also about how to overcome the darkness in yourself. On the surface, The Neverending Story seems to be a standard children's fantasy novel, but that's not true. Third reason, the connection between fantasy and reality. One of the novel's recurring themes is the importance of fantasy and imagination. As you can see, I have put some marks on my favorite moments, and one of my favorite moments include the scene where Atreyu is told about fantasy. During the course of the novel, it's said that people who lose connection to fantasy are prone to falling into lies. They are more prone to believing lies. At the same time, the novel warns you about going back into the real world. Because if you don't, you get stuck there forever and lose yourself. Well, here's the one dialogue I do want to read. This book was translated from German into Russian, and now I'm trying to translate as a part of it from Russian to English. Well, if people think that Fantastica doesn't exist, they wouldn't think to visit us. If people never saw you in your true form, then you can do anything to humans. Anything, because they obey power willingly. Because nothing gives more power over people than lies. This book does have a few philosophical and very interesting moments. The Neverending Story on the surface seems to be an ordinary children's fantasy novel, but don't let that fool you, because this novel is also full of thoughts and sentences that makes the reader think. And at the same time, this book doesn't enforce any ideas on the readers. The Neverending Story is one of the reasons why adults should read books that are intended for children, because children's novels, they can contain much deeper and more complex thoughts than the so-called adult novels. And then the final reason is the world building. The world of Fantastica is very interesting. It's not your standard medieval Europe, although I love medieval European settings. Fantastica has no borders. It's just very big and huge. Apparently, as I understand, the Fantastica exists beyond space and time. And the creatures that live in Fantastica are unique. For example, the mountain-eating giants. And that's it. These are the 4 reasons why the Neverending Story is worth reading. You have a sense of adventure. You can simply enjoy this book as an adventure if you want so. This one also has very deep philosophical and very interesting thoughts in general, if you're searching for something deeper. It has very unique world building. If you don't want to see a simple medieval Europe, and it has an interesting character development. There is also darkness. I like how Ende explores the darkness of the main character in this book. And now a few musical facts about the novel, because I love music. There's a metalcore band named Atreyu. I listened to it literally yesterday, and I liked a few songs. Not completely my thing, but was still good. I don't listen to Korn, but one of their albums is called The Nothing, after the Nothing from the novel. This album has a kind of sad backstory. I'm not going to go into detail, go check that out for yourself. And last but not least, this one, to be honest, needs confirmation. The Russian Wikipedia page for the Neverending Story, well, this is Google translated, says that the Neverending Story had an influence on the plot of Avantasia's albums. I like Avantasia. This project is very good. I like the Moonglow and the first 2 metal opera albums. I checked on Google whether that's true. However, I haven't found the proof. If that's true, please point it out in the comments whether there's a connection between the Neverending Story and Avantasia. Also, fun fact, the Avantasia comes from 2 words, Avalon and Fantasia. Avalon plus Fantasia equals Avantasia. Alright, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you liked my video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment and follow me on social media. See you next time. Goodbye.